Working in the government sector, we know the whole environment is far more ambiguous. It's far more nuanced, or needs to be far more nuanced, than working in the commercial sector. And I think what we need to do is really just step back and be very clear about what we're trying to do. What is our strategy and purpose?
When we're looking to understand how best to effectively communicate a message and cut through, I think the best place to start is to start with, our strengths and what we're really good at, and that's, I think, where the strong messages will come from.
Welcome to GovComms, a podcast about the practice and function of communication in government and the public sector. My name is David Pembroke. Thanks for joining me. Today, a discussion with two industry leaders about change and transformation and how best to lead your people when perhaps you don't have all the answers. These are unusually turbulent times. The introduction of artificial intelligence into the workflows of communications teams is upending the ways of work. Understanding ethical guardrails, new capability and accelerated learning are making it pretty uncomfortable in many workplaces, I've got to say, including mine. But short of leaving the field of play and waving the white flag, the opportunity is to turn around, face the challenge and plan for progress. So to help us make sense of it all and help us onto the right path, we're joined by two of Australia's most credentialed and prominent leadership experts, Dr. Marianne Broadbent and Adam Kyriacou. Marianne Broadbent has held senior global roles with Gartner and served as an Associate Dean and Professor at the Melbourne Business School. She is the author of the book, The Agile Executive, and serves on the board of the Conversation Media Group. Adam Kyriacou has over 20 years' experience working in the government, commercial and not-for-profit sectors. He has held global roles with Hudson International and launched Odgers Bernstein's leadership development in Australia. Both Adam and Marianne work with the leading consultancy, Future Leadership. Marianne and Adam, thank you and welcome to GovComms. But Marianne, if I might start with you, it's a little rough out here. Our dedicated audience of government and public sector communication professionals being asked to do more with less, learn and apply new technologies, work faster, create more content, build capability, think strategically, deliver results. What advice do you have to the teams out there to deal with this ever-present change and mode of transformation that we need to keep up with in order to stay relevant and in order to be effective?
Thanks, David. Look, there are many challenges and opportunities at present. As you noted yourself, with the shifts in technology, we're also seeing so many overlapping change cycles. More is expected. I think that's a very salient point. Much more is expected of people today, perhaps in some areas. And we are in if you like, a morass of communication ecosystem. It's very hard to get attention. Working in the government sector, we know the whole environment is far more ambiguous. It's far more nuanced, or needs to be far more nuanced, than working in the commercial sector. And I think what we need to do is really just step back and be very clear about what we're trying to do. What is our strategy and purpose? And in thinking about that, I know that in my own case, I've worked in multiple sectors, and Adam and I are very familiar with the similarities and differences in sectors, the similarities and differences in demands. But it's important, I think, for each of us to step back and say, what's the real purpose of what we do? What's the purpose of our organisation? Why are we here? And how can we help ourselves and those around us to really focus? I think for each of us, it's about getting some clear space, some clear air, and in some ways, and this might sound a bit harsh, taking accountability for the environment around us. So that would be my first point. And the second point would be really understanding where our strengths are, really understanding what we can leverage. And then we work a lot with organisations on in the development area, and then being just good enough in other areas that are important. So a lot of it is really around understanding your strengths, understanding where you can make a difference, and being true to yourself.
To the first point, to stop and to think and to settle and to agree on purpose and mission and what we're going to do, that takes time. And I don't have that time. People are pushing me and we've got to get things done. We've got to get it moving out the door. What's your advice for people as to how they can claim some of that time? And how much time does it take to land on a mission or a purpose?
Look, I think there's a lot we can do about our own priorities. And I think we have to look carefully at what it is we're trying to do. Yes, there are a lot of demands on us. I could use some of my own experience. I've had 4 kids. I've done PhDs while working, studying, having kids and so on. And sometimes it's a matter of thinking, what's important now? What's right important now? And no one's going to help you sort that out except yourself, basically. And so think about it, you're an individual, you're a professional, you're part of a team, you lead a team. What is it that you need to prioritise in each of those areas, and really, really understand that? And talk with those around you and make sure that there is focus in your team. I know that I had several stints in Gartner. It was a very challenging, difficult environment, including through the .com period as well. And we had to work very carefully on what we could do and what we couldn't do. And we really had to focus. We had to share our experiences with one another. But we did also have to step back a little and decide on what we wanted to do. So I do think people can say, oh, I've got so much to do, but often we're our own worst enemies. I guess that's my message, to take or make the time.
So just to, if you might share that story about that difficult time inside Gartner, what was happening that was making it difficult for you and your team to be able to be effective?
Well, I think I had 2 stints in Gartner. When I went back, I was leading new product development for the company across the globe. Our share price was falling. We were listed on the New York Stock Exchange. We had a lot of, fairly entrenched individuals who'd been there for quite a while, didn't want to change. Part of my job and that of others was to take them on a change journey. And it was really then understanding what drove those people, what mattered to them, what was it that would help them get more stimulation from their role, what was it that would match their drivers with the company's drivers as well? What was the company trying to do? What were we trying to do? And then how could we identify in a contained way initially where the levers for change were? Don't try and change the whole organisation. Just which part could we work with? Where did we see there was an opportunity? Because one group in particular was failing very badly, and we actually approached them. With a matrix organisation, they didn't all report to us. We had to change a whole groups and teams and the way people worked, and none of them reported to us. So that was the challenge. But it was a matter of working with people, listening to them, understanding what their issues were, and then working with them over time. And it was a very short space of time. I'm literally talking weeks, because of the demands on us, wow, demands of the investors and the owners of the company, to identify what our path forward was. And it was really understanding what are the drivers, what we could do, starting small, and then showing others that actually we could do it. And getting small wins initially bought us time, it bought us credibility, and that meant that, I'm a big believer in create envy. If you get one group that's successful, everybody wants to know, how did you do that? And so it's targeting. It's really targeting. Look, comms people are really good at targeting. So it is really around target where you want to make an impact, but in a way that will act as yeast and a catalyst for others.
I like that. Create envy. I think I'll try to do that a little bit later today. But Adam, Marianne mentions that in her earlier answer there about focusing on your strengths. But shouldn't we be trying to address weaknesses as a way of developing our effectiveness?
Absolutely, David. We need to be aware of development areas that we can focus on. But I think when we're looking to understand how best to effectively communicate a message and cut through, I think the best place to start is to start with our strengths and what we're really good at, and that's, I think, where the strong messages will come from. And I think if we don't come from a place of strength in terms of what we're really good at when we're thinking through priorities for communicating, I think we run the risk of being message deliverers. And I think one of the important things about communication is to shift that to be more strategic in terms of connecting. And if we come from a place of strength, I think that's where we'll best connect and communicate most effectively.
So inside these communication teams in government departments and agencies and public sector organisations, how should they think about their role in leadership as part of the enterprise? How should comms teams be thinking about the way that they can contribute to high performance across the enterprise?
Well, I think they're absolutely pivotal because they are part of the leadership team, and so like any leadership team, the way that we think it's most effective to think about an enterprise is to have that enterprise mindset, if you like, and that's where particularly for communications teams to think holistically about what is the key purpose or drivers for that particular department or agency, and are we being really clear in terms of developing our messages for that particular holistic enterprise purpose. And then I think as communication leaders, we've got to, be the model of that behaviour, and that behaviour is not, not just how we externally support messages; it's how we internally model, that type of leadership. But I think there's some practical things as well, David, to have as part of the way we operate. Communications teams need to help establish rhythm and the norms of behaviour and how things are communicated, either when someone starts in an organisation or when someone's putting out a press release. There needs to be rhythms and norms on that, and then I think there needs to be a really strong understanding of technology and AI, so that we know when best to use it and when to not over-rely on it as well. And then I think that builds within your communication team that sense of trust and psychological safety to allow voices to come through. And hopefully, as Marianne said at the beginning, that then aligns communication to the vision and purpose of that enterprise. So I think they play an incredibly important role, not just within their own teams, but within the wider leadership group of an organisation.
Marianne, it's the eternal lament of people who work in communications that they're not taken seriously. They're seen as an add-on, seen as the end of the line function, that they're not really a contributor to the strategic development of the explanation of a policy or a program, a service or a regulation, and that often seen as nothing more than the colouring in department. Make that look pretty, make that happen. Are you seeing a change in the role and the importance and the recognition of the importance of strategic communications in the organisations that you're working with, both public sector and private sector?
Absolutely. And we work with many public sector organisations in both the executive search space, recruiting really great communications leaders, and we work in the development side as well with teams that are often including communications teams and with communications teams as well. And my observation would certainly be that the level of respect, need, acknowledgement of communication specialists and communication strategists, professional communicators, is much higher than it was previously. I think I've been the beneficiary in different organisations of fantastic comms teams who've understood what we were trying to do in an organisation, if you like, and understood how to target, understood multiple channels of communication, and what we see in organisations, and we've worked with many senior leaders on making sure that they are well connected with their comms people, because sometimes you're quite right, their capacity is undervalued. We often work with leaders when they've just come into positions, into very senior positions, and one of the early things that we work with them on is, how are you positioning yourself? What's your cadence? What's your rhythm? How are you communicating? What are the messages? What help are you getting from your comms team? Have you approached them? They will have a whole raft of experiences and talents that you could do that. And I can think of some very specifically, some leaders who had never used video comms, who'd never used multi-channels before, who became very, very comfortable with weekly Ask Me Anythings. And that was all, they were coached by the comms people and encouraged by them. But it was interesting, they hadn't necessarily thought of it, so that's one thing to think about. But then my question would be to the comms people, do you make yourself available very readily that way? And when a new executive, a new senior person, any new people leader starts, what is it that you're offering them to help them do their job better, to help have the presence that they need to have, and to hone their communications? Because most people going into a new role, it's a different experience for them, or it's a promotion. There are different expectations on them. So alerting them to the fact that you can leverage their strengths, you can support them, you can help them make them successful, I think is where we've seen some comms teams really shine, and then their role in that organisation is much more visible.
So Adam, when did you first observe that communications was being recognised and taken more seriously and being used as the capability that it is to help senior leaders, but also to help organisations to be more effective, both internally and externally?
I've seen it for quite some time. I did a lot of work in the UK and was there for 15 years supporting government departments there, and I had the opportunity to support the Prime Minister's office at one point with an internal communications appointment, and I was really impressed with the way that they had thought through the integral significance of that communications individual. And I think I saw a shift there where they weren't just, as you said at the beginning, colouring in at the end. They were intimately involved in shaping the message once the policy, or most of the policy work had been done. And this was, I guess, cutting edge communications because it was what was coming out of the Prime Minister's office, number 10. And so they were really intimately involved in shaping how that was communicated. And they did it with a lot of the things that we've talked about. They were always aligned. They knew who their audience was. They were modelling that behaviour, but they were also trusted to give the advice and the information that then shaped communication. And I've seen that played out. I've been back in Australia for 10 years, and I've seen that that thread really run through now, where no longer is it, I don't think, enough to put the shine, if you like, or the spin on something. Really strong communications individuals are being asked to get involved much earlier in the process, and I think that's a good thing, because they bring their expertise and nuance of how to message far clearer and far earlier. And I think we're seeing that in Australia as the recent Darwin cyclone, which was incredibly well communicated. The information was there. The team was working very effectively together with the Bureau of Meteorology and all of the emergency services. And the feedback you got from the public discourse was that communication was incredibly early, it was clear, it was aligned with information, and it was adjusting all the time. I just think that's a really great example of really effective comms that would have been practiced prior to the crisis. I think that's really important, to be always thinking beforehand. So I think it's come a long way, David, and it's great to see.
Well, that's it. That gives me an idea for the next couple of weeks. I think I might track down the people in the Northern Territory and in Darwin. In fact, get a bit of a case study there as to exactly what was done, because I'm pretty sure, as you say, it would have been well practiced. And interesting, your hat tip there to the UK government and the work of the Government Communications Service. They've recognised in the UK for more than 10 years that communication is a profession, and they treat it as a profession in the UK, and everyone works for the Government Communications Service, but they work in all the different departments and areas. And, look, we won't get started on my admiration for the UK Government Communication Service, because they know, and many of them listening, and hello to all of you, but they've really led the way in terms of the development of communications as a profession. Now, interestingly enough, Adam, most recently, Government Communication Service in the UK government has done it again, and they are leading on the integration of AI. And this is obviously, as Paul Keating used to say, every galah in the pet shop's talking about it. What advice do you have to people working in government communications at the moment as to how they need to be thinking, how they need to be preparing, and how they need to be just readying themselves and their teams to integrate this important technology that is clearly going to fundamentally change the role that they play and the way that they play that role?
Yeah, look, I don't think anyone can pretend to be the absolute expert. The technology and AI is changing so fast that it's really, I think, challenging to be right at the point of it. But what I think are good principles are the things we've talked about, which is using the tool, but ensuring that you understand really clearly what the department or organisation's actual vision and purpose is, and ensure that you're set up to take advantage of what AI brings, but always be the human in the loop at all stages of that. Because if you let it run and let it run without, I think, a really strong central theme running through it, we all know where that can potentially lead very fast. So I think I'm not across what the UK comms teams are doing specifically about AI, but what we're seeing, and Marianne will be able to comment further as well, we're seeing really progressive comms teams and organisations themselves embracing it, understanding it, trialling it, putting innovation groups together to understand where it works and where it doesn't work, and then having a really strong framework to ensure that there are some guardrails around how it works, but embracing the opportunity as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we encourage people to undertake structured innovation, if I can put it that way. And what we've seen works in organisations is where you have an initial group who might be enthusiasts, who might be well-led, who are comfortable with technology, who start trialling it and then start sharing their experiences with others. We've done this in our organisation. It's been really interesting to watch. And then understand and learn as you go, because it is a process that takes time. Some people are more ready or more adept, and so let's use their expertise. Let's have some experimentation so that you can start and learn. Because if you don't start and learn, you won't start in a year's time. It's too late. It's absolutely too late. If organisations haven't started now to really experiment and understand, trial, use AI in different ways, and some might be internal use, some might be external use. There's multiple ways in which you might use AI, but let's really have some really thoughtful people in the organisation tasked to do that and encouraged to do that, and then share their experiences constantly, act as mentors to others. And we've seen that seems to be the process that works. Some organisations I know have almost taken a week out and had everyone do crash courses and so on. That can work for some organisations. I cannot see it working in federal government or state government or local government, but it's much more about understanding who those people are in your organisation who are ready or we've already started. Give them guidance, but give them guardrails. As Adam said, make sure there's a human element in it. But I think every organisation should now be doing some experimentation. Use your millennials, use those who are very comfortable with the technology, because for them, it's a development opportunity working with a more senior person. For the senior person, it's a development opportunity, understanding what you can actually extract from technology without too much effort.
Now, I'm sure you didn't mean to direct that about the older, let's say, not digital native people like me, but I've got to say
I'm older than you, I can guarantee it.
But it's unsettling. It is unsettling. So in terms of the, managing the environment around that sort of experimentation and structured innovation, I like that idea. That idea of teams working together and perhaps leadership again coming not from the corner office, but this leadership is now coming from the floor. So, Adam, how do we prepare as teams for? Because this is a fundamental shift in the way that teams operate and high-performing teams operate, and the leadership is coming from the lower areas and not the top areas. So, how do we cope with that? How do we get ready for that?
Look, I think it's really exciting, David, because it's not often that you get the opportunity to create a proper multi-generational workforce like this, or teams, where some of the expertise and experience of qualified, experienced leaders can help frame and shift how we look at programmed or thoughtful innovation. But at the same time, you've got another group, in this case a younger group, a digital native group, who are just experiencing and doing this so differently and in such a fluid way that it would be a real shame to not capture that. But you have to do it, I think, as Marianne said, in a way that is thoughtful, that is intentional. It's that intentional leadership to be able to go, all right, well, this is happening. We need to take advantage of it. We need to be cutting edge, but we need to have a framework. So, back to the principles of enterprise leadership, it's thinking holistically about the organisation, making sure that the digital natives buy into that and understand what the purpose of it is, and so they have an underpinning of that innovation framework, and then letting them loose in a sense, in a controlled way, because that's where you will get genuine learning. And my own experience, and I'm certainly, I'm post 50, so I'm no digital native, but I'm learning new things, every day that are helpful, and also discovering things that are that's not probably where we want to go. So let's learn from that too.
For people who are used to leading, people who are used to being in charge, people who are used to, running the show, how do you help them? How should they think about this? What mindsets and skills do they need to acquire to deal with something which is transformational in the way their organisation is going to operate? They want to remain effective, but how do they deal with not just the skills piece of it, but the emotional side of it is like, well, hang on, I'm now no longer the most important person in the room. Everybody else is more important than me because I'm down the bottom.
Well, look, David, it's a whole shift in how we think about leaders and leadership as well. And the comment I was going to make was, if we don't do this with the emerging workforce and our younger professionals in comms, they will leave because they know they have some of those skills that we can use and leverage. I think with if you like, more senior people, whatever, it's very much about how curious are you? Do you still have that passion? Do you still have that willingness to learn? How comfortable are you making yourself vulnerable? And how open are you to shift and change how you might do things? That's actually what we look for. We look for that in senior leaders today, because if you're not able to be open to different ways of doing things, then you won't deal with the level of change and ambiguity that's around you. And it is hard, but I think it's very much about how you also build that trust with others around you, that that there is that opportunity to continue to grow. I mean, some of the really good leaders we see, when they come into a role, they're very clear with their teams, their executives, whatever level they're in. Look, this is who I am. This is how I work. This is what I'm really good at. This is what I'm not so good at. This is where I'd really appreciate some assistance. And I think that level of openness and humility goes a long way. And when we look at some of the different ways people are now leading or being open to, as Adam called it, some of that multi-generational leadership, they find it very satisfying. So I think it can be unsettling, yes, because you realise that the way you used to do things won't necessarily work with the workforce that's emerging. There are many different types of expectations. Some of them might be reasonable, some of them might be not reasonable, but we have to deal with them. And I think that level of being open to having a younger mentor, for example, is not a bad thing. And in the comms area, offering a senior leader the opportunity to leverage their strengths, to showcase them, I think we've certainly seen it as a key to helping people understand a different way of engaging. And it really is about engaging, a different way of engaging with their workforce.
David, just to build on that quickly, you mentioned mindsets as well, and Marianne just touched on that. We talk about enterprise leadership, and the core principles of that are having a solidarity mindset, and having that for the enterprise as for leaders. Being radical in your candor, so being able to be open and talk, honestly, directly, but respectfully, and then making decisions for the long-term prosperity of the organisation, and probably just as importantly, having a network style of leadership whereby you're leveraging relationships across an organisation to connect complexity and to work. And I don't think there's a more complex organisation than a government department or an agency. Of so many factors playing in. So I think the principles of enterprise leadership really play into the AI space very well. And if we think about that under those mindsets, I think that can really help.
Marianne, how are we going around these senior leadership change? Are you seeing lots of people taking it on, or are you seeing lots of people struggling? Or how would you characterise our progress, not only here in Australia, but the work that you're doing globally? How well are senior managers doing in adapting to what is a radical change to their context?
Look, I think there are lots of challenges. I think what we see makes a real difference to leaders is the time and effort they put into their teams, frankly, and how they really work with those around them, and not expect that they will know everything, that they will do everything themselves, but how they are able to build their teams and the expertise around them. And a key part of that for us is how we then work with organisations and how they work to really build trust in teams. And I say that because when you have to work faster, it's really important that you can work efficiently and effectively. You can't do that if you don't have trust. Trust actually is the grease for the wheels for that. And it's not an amorphous thing. You can get your hands around it. And it really is about four things. It's about what's your intent, people understanding what your intent is. So as a leader, are you clear on intent? It's about integrity. At a simple level, that's doing what you say you're going to do. And what sense of purpose have you shared? It's about building capability and displaying capability. And if people don't have it, then helping them get it, and then making sure people deliver results. Because there's both, if you like, competence areas and behaviour areas. So what we see in effective leaders who are able to deal with faster moving environments around them is that they will put a focus on building trust faster and building those relationships. Some of that has actually come from the tech sector, which might sound a bit strange. 10 or 15 years ago, we saw a lot of work in what's called agile ways. And I mean truly agile ways. I don't mean people who thought they were agile but weren't. But there were tools and techniques there where many teams came together for 6 weeks, got something done, then they were part of another team. For those teams to be effective, they really had to learn who one another was, where the strengths were in the group, how could they leverage them. They had to get to know one another as people, and they had to build trust quickly. And that's generally where it worked. It worked really well, and that's what they did. What we see now is that level of speed is important to many leaders in many different environments, particularly including the public sector, where you have multiple changes of machinery of government, you have multiple changes of policy, you have so many different stresses going on that we know that where you have built that level of trust, then you'll be able to deal with the crises much more efficiently and effectively, and you'll be more likely to avoid them because you might well take advice from someone and listen actively because you have that inbuilt level of respect. So we do see a shift and change, but not everywhere. And what we try and do is work with leaders to ensure that in order to be successful, there's a couple of key things that are important for them. And one of those is that building trust. And comms people know that more than anyone else, because you know what happens if there's a crisis. You've got to have trust before the crisis. And as Adam said, when we look at emergency services and how across a government, we find that there's so much more collaboration, there's so much more knowledge, people have got to know one another. You think through some parts in COVID that worked well. Why did it work well? It worked well because people got to know each other. They had a shared sense of purpose. You can do that in a crisis sometimes, but how about we do it when we don't have a crisis as well? But building that infrastructure of trust in teams, in organisations, and for comms people, focus on it yourselves or ourselves, so that if we can model that, then we can start to see other people might go, oh, okay, that looks pretty neat. Because if comms people can act quickly, then that's a real plus for the whole organisation.
So, Adam, Building trust, Marianne sort of explained it there and described it very well in terms of the complexity and the ambiguity of public sector organisations with so many moving parts, so many competing interests, so much change taking place. What's your best advice to people around building trust in complex areas where it's not stable, where there is just so much going on? How do we build trust? How do we establish trust in a public sector, in a government organisation, which is perhaps different to a private sector organisation?
Yeah. Look, I think the most important thing, as we've been talking about, is to first of all get really clear that everybody is aligned, and when we're working with leadership teams, we talk a lot about that solidarity mindset and radical candor. And what that really means is that when you're in an environment where you're debating or discussing a particular point of view, it's encouraged that you have a very open and robust conversation. But the enterprise mindset, the solidarity mindset, is that you come to a decision, and that decision is not only accepted but supported by the group after the conversation and the communication has taken place, and outwardly expressed in that enterprise solidarity mindset way. I think that really helps shape the trust of a leadership team or a communication team, because everyone has the opportunity to have their say, to be respected, to have it debated. But once a decision is made, they move forward with a really high degree of solidarity. And I think that then builds trust, because it needs to then be consistently communicated throughout the work that those teams do. Trust is also really important around yourself and understanding yourself. So we work with a lot of leaders to raise their level of self-awareness as it relates to how they are coming to work and how they are being perceived and what they bring to the table. And if we can get them to a level of really high authenticity around self-awareness, then that breeds trust within teams and organisations as well. And then, as Marianne said, we then really ask people to do what they say they'll do, build that muscle of a trusted place to deliver and to work together. And sometimes, David, these things take a little bit of time. Depends on the stage of an organisation's leadership team or a communication leadership team. But we really strongly encourage people, particularly leaders, to step into that, to develop that culture of trust as well. I'm sure Marianne has some points on that too.
Yeah, I think great teams don't just happen. They are worked on, and they take time and they take investment. And the key thing here that we see is being intentional about it, being aware of its importance, and then being intentional and deliberate. And one of the key other parts of some of the work that we do is helping people to understand that their key team is actually their peer team. That's actually where they can get the most done, and that it's hard sometimes, but as a default, extend trust to others. Now, some of us aren't raised to do that. Our professional training is not to do that. But the importance of extending trust to others, if you can do that, is really helpful, because that, again, if you extend trust to others, you will actually get it back. And it's very much a two-way street. But the key thing for us is being intentional about it, putting the effort in. It's not like it takes a year. It's a much shorter time. Someone once said to me, well, I've just taken on a new team. How long before they'll be a good, high-performing team? I said, about 18 months. He said, okay, that's not long enough. I mean, it's too long. I can't wait that long. And I said, in that case, maybe 3 months if you really work at it. And that's the sort of focus that we see now, because if you need to get things done quickly, you have to have mutual trust amongst people, and that doesn't just necessarily happen.
But in a public sector, say a government organisation, government teams, it would be my experience that radical candour is easy to say, a little bit harder to do. So how do we prepare people to be able to be radically candid with people, understanding that consequences could emerge if you're too radical and you are too candid?
The other term we use is careful bluntness. We bring careful bluntness to a group, and that was coined by a client of ours when we worked with their team, and it was a public sector, it was a federal government department,
Right.
Team of about 30 across two DepSex teams, and it was quite fascinating. And at the end of about a 3-month process that we'd worked with the team on, the leaders said, and of course, I think we'd like to thank the future leadership team for their careful bluntness. And ever since he said that, I thought, that's what we do. We provide careful bluntness. So if you can be carefully blunt
trademarked that,
with
have you?
others,
You could write a book about that.
I should have trademarked it. But it is really about understanding the context and what's appropriate to say. I mean, I've worked in an American company for a long time, and I learned that I was sometimes not carefully blunt. I was just blunt, and that was not the culture there, and it was not acceptable.
Yeah.
And speaking in euphemisms was much more acceptable. I think I managed to learn how to speak in a way that was heard appropriately, and I think some of my colleagues learnt to be a little bit more direct. But I think, again, it's very hard to give feedback that's really taken in if you don't trust the person giving it to you, if you don't believe that they've got good intent, for example. So that's why these things are all related. But it is how you structure, how you frame, how you're thoughtful about the radical candour or the bluntness that you share.
And Adam, how do you measure progress across whether it be a 3-month period or an 18-month period? How do you know that you're on the path to greater effectiveness?
Do you mean, David, how do we know if we're working with a team, or if you're a team itself, and how are they measuring it, or a bit of both?
Yeah, both. A bit of both,
Yeah.
really.
Well, look, in the programs that we run, we do a lot of pre-survey, if you like, to understand what the culture is, what the temperature is, what the level of communication is, and we measure that actively across the course of all of our programs. So we have some really clear indicators of that. But I think probably most importantly, teams themselves and leaders themselves need to set up a proper feedback loop to understand, how and is it working for the teams. I think you can see it. It's palpable on many occasions because the dynamic of an organisation is just working more effectively. Marianne and I were working with a commercial client recently that Marianne had worked with for quite some time. And I was in a facilitated workshop with around 20 executives. And my comment afterwards was that was a really high functioning executive team with, good communication. It was clear. It was give and take. There was space for everyone to talk, and that that was a development path that team had been on that certainly wasn't there 12, 18 months ago. So I think if you put the things that we've been talking about into practice and you're intentional, then you can and will see that. But our advice would be to always have a feedback loop as well. Our CEO is incredibly good, Michelle Loader, at just checking in and seeing how things work for people after we've tried new things and triangulating that to get a sense of how we're going. I think that's good leadership as well.
We've worked with a number of government agencies over time, and we've done test retests in different ways with them, and they have the evidence of the shift in how a team sees themselves. There are particular tools that we didn't make up, if you like, but a standard industry tools where you could actually assess this. And we're very accustomed to using them. And they share with us that situation. We're also very familiar with the Australian Government Census, the People Matters in New South Wales, and the other surveys. It's where we look initially. For example, some of the most interesting results are around what the organisation thinks of the senior leadership team. And that's actually stimulated some work in a number of organisations because it wasn't where they thought it should be. And even if the team thought they were working quite well together, the rest of the organisation did not see that. And so that's really important for people to have confidence in their leaders and the leadership team. So we know that leaders in the public sector use that evidence, and then sometimes they do some work, sometimes we do some work, and the next year, things have actually changed. Things have shifted. You can have an impact if you put in that kind of effort. It really does work.
You've both been very generous with your time. Thank you very much, and your expertise. But perhaps as a final question to both of you, Marianne, to start, how then, having listened to the conversation that we've had today, people working in GovComms, how should they be thinking about their careers? How should they be thinking about their skills, their mindsets and other things as they continue to want to make a better contribution, to be more effective? Because interestingly, the coin of the realm of people who work in government communications is in fact trust. If
Yes.
citizens and stakeholders understand and appreciate policy, programs, services and regulation, we can build trust in government. So they know trust is the result of their work, and they understand trust in their teams as well. But how then, more broadly, should they think about themselves and then the role that they can play? Marianne, perhaps to you first.
Yeah, look, I think it's being very deliberate in their own development and looking at where they can make an impact. I'm one of those people who, I've had a very eclectic career. Some people think it's a fairly bizarre career, but for me, it's always about, at this stage, where do I think I can have an impact that will be helpful or useful? And where can I make a difference? If I don't think I can make a difference, then I'm kind of not interested. But different things drive different people. So understand what your drivers are, but really look at your own development. I'm a big believer in people getting involved in their professional organisations or some professional organisation, because that extends your thought processes, it extends your network. What are the areas where you need to be stronger at? Okay, you've got some strengths, but you need to be better at other areas. How can you gain that? Perhaps go on a stretch project. Put yourself forward. And my advice is always, and I think the subtitle of that book's The Agile Executive, is embracing risks and rewards. Unless you take some career risks, you will not get career rewards. Now, those risks need to be educated risk, but if you don't put yourself in a situation where you're uncomfortable or a little bit uncomfortable, then you probably won't grow. So think about where you can learn the most, and think about, when you're looking at what's my next step, where will I learn something I don't know? But I'll get the job. I'll be seen as having enough to get it, but I'll actually be stretched in it, because that's what we see. That's what we really look for. So look for stretch opportunities. Put yourself forward. Don't be afraid to say, I'm ready to do something else. I'd like my role widened. I think I could do this. I can add more value here. I've been doing some study, and I think I'd love to work on that area. So it's about being absolutely proactive.
Adam.
Thanks, David. Look, I'm agreeing with all of what Marianne said there. I'll just add and build on that to say, be aligned to purpose. Be aligned to the purpose that you're involved in. And if you're not aligned and you can't feel that connection, then, that's a pretty good sign. Maybe you need to find a purpose that fits more strongly with you. Do the work on yourself. I can't emphasise enough that true leadership and in any field, I think, comes from those who really want to understand how they work first and then can take that into the world to work with others. And then just finally, building on Marianne, embrace opportunity, if that's AI or technology, but never lose sight of the fact, particularly in communications, that it is human to human communication, and keep the human in there as much as possible.
Well, thank you, Adam Kyriacou and Dr. Marianne Broadbent from Future Leadership. Marianne, what might be the best way for people to reach out to Future Leadership and be in contact if this has sort of set something off and they feel that they might need some support inside their teams to be able to, get access to your, and Adam's extensive experience and obviously the rest of the team there at Future Leadership?
Our email addresses are on our website, so very happy to be contacted directly, or there's a generic email which is info@futureleadership.com.au. But very happy to hear from people. And yes, we know our email addresses are there. They're just our full names at futureleadership.com.au. It's
a pretty sharp website too.
Well, I have to say, we have a fabulous person called a creative communications officer, and we value comms hugely, and you can probably see that from the way in which we like to interact and some of the ways in which we share what we do with those who've come to us.
It's excellent. So anyway, I have been a little bit greedy with my time this afternoon. I feel like I've been to the therapist, and I'm now going off. See, what happened? This is a real trick, running these podcasts. I've been doing since 2015. Every time I feel like I need some answers, we find smart people like you to come onto the podcast so I can learn for an hour or so and then take it away and hopefully improve my performance. So on behalf of the audience, a very big thanks to both of you today for sharing your wisdom, your experience, your skills, your knowledge, your behaviour, your attitude. Because again, I think if we can all, move down this path, as difficult as it is, at least there are the foundations there that we can continue to go back to, because ultimately it's people that change, not organisations. So we've really got to get that people piece absolutely right. So anyway, a big thanks again to both of you, and to you, the audience. Thanks for coming back once again. What a great conversation with two of Australia's leading, well, actually probably two of the world's leading experts in change and transformation. And really, it's unavoidable. We all have to deal with it. We all have to shape up to it. And whatever role we are, whether we're a graduate position or whether we're a DepSec, whoever we are, we're in a place of change and transformation, and we need to find and model behaviours that are going to help us to make progress. Because ultimately, as I said, in government communications, if we are effective, we build trust. If we build trust, we strengthen that faith in our democratic institutions, and perhaps we can make progress together through effective communication. But a big thanks to all of you. Please, ratings or reviews. Many of you have done that over the years. We've been running since 2015. But please, what it does help is the program to be found. And so if you do have time on your favourite podcast app, it doesn't take long to leave a rating or a review, but if you could do that, we would be grateful. And also on social media, you will find the latest from GovComms there as well. But thank you so much for coming back once again, and thank you to our guests today for a wonderful conversation. But we'll be back at the same time in another 4 weeks. But for the moment, people, please be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.